The rope creaked under strain as the noose tightened. A gathering of 30-odd townsfolk stood in the gray morning light, breath visible in the cold air, watching as a tall Apache man stood on the gallows platform. His face was weathered but proud, shoulders straight despite bound hands. Rain clouds gathered above, pregnant with an approaching storm that mirrored the tension in the town square of Whispering Pines. Silas Harrington stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hat pulled low. At 42, he carried himself with the posture of a military man, though it had been years since he wore a uniform. His dark coat was frayed at the edges, much like the man himself, worn but serviceable. A long scar ran from his right temple to his jawline, silvery against his sun-browned skin. Sheriff Marshal Thornton read the charges with a voice that carried across the silent square. Running Bear of the Apache Nation, you have been found guilty of murdering a white settler and attacking the Thornton homestead. For this crime, you are sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The Apache man's eyes swept across the crowd, not with fear, but with a quiet dignity that made some onlookers shift uncomfortably. His gaze finally landed on Silas, lingering there as if recognizing something in the scarred man that others did not possess. The condemned man's lips moved, words too soft for most to hear, spoken in his native tongue. But Silas understood enough Apache to catch the meaning. The circle continues until someone breaks it. The trapdoor dropped with a sudden crack that echoed like thunder. The man's body jerked, then went still. In that same moment, the skies opened, rain beginning to fall in heavy drops that sent townsfolk scattering for shelter, leaving Silas alone with the hangman and the sheriff's deputies. Silas remained, rain soaking through his hat, running in rivulets down his scar. He watched until they cut the body down, unable to move, trapped by memories of other deaths, other injustices that played out in his mind like ghosts that never truly left. You planning to drown yourself standing up, Harrington? Sheriff Thornton's voice cut through the downpour. The lawman stood under the overhang of the jail, tobacco juice staining his gray beard. Just making sure justice was done, Silas replied, his voice rough from disuse. Thornton spat a stream of tobacco onto the muddy ground. Justice was served. That savage killed my brother's farmhand and would have killed more if they hadn't stopped him. His eyes narrowed. Thought you of all people would understand that. Silas touched the scar on his face unconsciously. I understand plenty, Marshal. Then understand this. Civilization's coming to these parts whether the savages like it or not. Thornton turned to go inside. Best remember which side you're on. Which side indeed. Silas walked away from the gallows, each step heavy in the mud. The rain washed down his face, but couldn't wash away the memories that surfaced like bodies in a flood. Memories of Moonlight Valley, of screams in the night, of his own voice shouting, "Stop!" Too late to make a difference. Silas's ranch sat 3 miles outside of town, nestled against the eastern slope of what locals called the Whisper Ridge. It wasn't much, a sturdy cabin he'd built himself, a small barn, corral, and 10 acres cleared for crops and grazing. Beyond that stretched forest and mountain, lands that still belonged more to wilderness than any man's claim. He'd come here 6 years ago, after drifting, drinking, and fighting his way through half a dozen territories. The land had been cheap because most settlers feared its proximity to Apache hunting grounds. Silas had no such fears, or perhaps he simply didn't fear death the way most men did. Inside the cabin, he hung his soaked coat by the stone fireplace and stoked the embers back to life. The interior was sparse but orderly, a table and 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, a bed in the corner, shelves of books that seemed at odds with his rough appearance. On the wall hung a single photograph in a simple frame, a young woman with kind eyes and a baby in her arms. Silas avoided looking at the photo as he pulled a worn leather journal from a shelf. Settling by the fire, he opened to a blank page and began to sketch with practiced strokes, the gallows, the rain, the eyes of the condemned man. The journal was nearly full of such drawings, battlefield scenes, burning villages, faces of the dead. His own private purgatory committed to paper. Lightning flashed outside as Silas closed the journal. The storm was worsening, reminding him that winter approached. He needed supplies from town before the heavy snows came. Tomorrow would do. Tonight, he would sit with his ghosts as he did most nights, in the company of silence and memories that never left him in peace. Morning brought clear skies, but a biting chill that spoke of snow before long. Silas hitched his bay mare to the small wagon and set out for Whispering Pines. He kept a mental inventory of what he needed: flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, nails to repair the barn door that winter winds had loosened last season. The town appeared unchanged from yesterday, though the gallows had been dismantled, all evidence of the hanging erased save for the trampled mud. Silas tied his horse outside Crawford's general store, nodding briefly to the owner, Ezra Montgomery, one of the few men in town he considered something close to a friend. "Morning, Silas," Ezra greeted him, leaning against the doorframe. "Stocking up before the snow flies?" "That's the plan." Silas removed his hat as he entered the store, his eyes adjusting to the dimmer light. "Need the usual, plus some extra nails for the barn." Ezra began gathering items. "Heard you stayed for the whole business yesterday." He didn't need to specify what business he meant. "Someone should bear witness," Silas replied, examining a shelf of tools to avoid Ezra's gaze. "You know, not everyone's convinced that Apache did what they claim." Ezra's voice lowered. "Samuel Thornton's place is mighty far from where they caught him." "Careful, Ezra. Talk like that isn't healthy around here." Silas selected a hammer, adding it to his supplies. "Just saying what some folks whisper." "Not me, of course." Ezra smiled thinly. "You need coffee too, right?" Their transaction concluded without further discussion of the hanging. Silas loaded his supplies into the wagon, planning to head straight back to his ranch. That's when he saw them, at the corner near the saloon. A young Apache woman with an unmistakable pride in her posture despite her obvious desperation, clutching a small girl to her side. The woman wore a buckskin dress worn thin in places, torn at the neckline. Her long dark hair was partially braided, partially loose with strands clinging to her face. The child beside her couldn't have been more than 5, with hollow cheeks and wide, fearful eyes that seemed too old for her young face. A group of men outside the saloon had noticed them too. Their laughter carried across the street, along with comments that made Silas's jaw tighten. "Please hire me for one night," the woman said to a passing townsman, her voice barely audible. "My daughter is very hungry." The man hurried past without looking at her. Another spat in the dirt near her feet. Something in Silas went still. The scene before him suddenly overlaid with older images. A woman clutching a child, begging for mercy in a burning village. He found himself moving toward them before he'd made any conscious decision to do so. The Apache woman tensed as he approached, pulling her daughter closer. Up close, Silas could see the details he'd missed from a distance. A fading bruise on her cheek, the tremble in her hands that she tried to hide, the way her eyes flickered with recognition when she saw his scar. "What's your name?" Silas asked, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "Eleanor," she replied after a hesitation, then nodded to the child. "She is Maya." Silas opened his saddlebag and removed a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Here," he said, offering a loaf of bread, "for the girl." Eleanor stared at the offering as if suspecting a trick, then slowly reached for it. When her fingers touched the cloth, she snatched it quickly, breaking off a piece and giving it to Maya first. The child ate cautiously at first, then with increasing speed as her hunger took over. "Ma'am, I wouldn't—" A deputy had approached, hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. "Sheriff says no begging in town." "They're leaving," Silas said, stepping slightly between the deputy and Eleanor. "With you?" The deputy raised an eyebrow. "Why?" The question hung in the air, loaded with insinuation. Before Silas could answer, a heavier set of boots sounded on the wooden boardwalk. Sheriff Thornton approached, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Problem here, Jenkins?" he asked the deputy, though his eyes fixed on Eleanor with a cold intensity that made her shrink back. "No problem," Silas answered before the deputy could speak. "I was just offering these folks a ride." Thornton's gaze shifted to Silas, then back to Eleanor. Something changed in his expression, a flicker of recognition, then a hardening. "You know who she is, Harrington? That's Running Bear's sister. The man we hanged yesterday." A murmur went through the small crowd that had gathered. Eleanor straightened her spine, lifting her chin despite the fear evident in her eyes. "Is that so?" Silas kept his voice neutral, though his heart had begun to pound harder. "Word is she was involved in the attack too." Thornton continued. Convenient she shows up right after justice is served, isn't it? She has a hungry child, Silas replied. That's all I see. Thornton stepped closer. Then you're not looking hard enough. These people stick together. If her brother was a murderer, then she's still a woman with a hungry child. Silas cut him off. And I'm still offering her a ride out of your town. For a tense moment, Silas thought Thornton might prevent them from leaving. Then the sheriff stepped back with a cold smile. Your choice, Harrington, but folks will talk. They'll wonder why a man with your history would take in an Apache woman. Silas helped Eleanor onto the wagon seat, lifting Maya up after her. Let them talk, he said, climbing up himself and taking the reins. As they pulled away from town, Silas felt Eleanor's eyes on him, studying his profile, lingering on the scar that traced his cheek. You know who I am, she finally said. Not a question, but a statement. Silas kept his gaze on the road ahead. I know your brother was hanged yesterday. I'm sorry for your loss. That is not what I meant. Her voice was soft but steady. You know my people. That scar, it was made by an Apache knife. Silas's hands tightened on the reins, a long time ago. At Moonlight Valley. The horses slowed as Silas's grip momentarily faltered. He turned to look at her fully for the first time. How do you know that name? Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. I know the scar of a survivor from Moonlight Valley. I know what happened there. Thunder rumbled in the distance again, though the sky remained clear. A different kind of storm was brewing between them, one made of shared history and pain that neither had expected to confront on this cold autumn day. The journey to Silas's ranch passed in weighted silence. Maya had fallen asleep against her mother's side, exhaustion overcoming her after the small meal. Eleanor remained alert, watching the landscape with the wariness of someone accustomed to danger approaching from any direction. As the cabin came into view, Silas finally spoke again. It's not much, but it's dry and warm. You and your daughter can rest here tonight. Why help us? Eleanor asked, the question that had clearly been on her mind since town. A man with your history, with that scar, why would you help Apache? Silas pulled the wagon to a stop before the cabin. Because your daughter is hungry, because winter's coming, because sometimes a person just needs help. He paused. Do those reasons matter? They might, Eleanor replied. If they're true. Silas helped them down from the wagon. They're true enough for tonight. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with 3 people instead of 1. Silas built up the fire while Eleanor stood near the door, Maya half hidden behind her skirts, taking in their surroundings with quick, darting glances. You can take the bed, Silas said, gesturing to the corner. I'll use the chair. Eleanor didn't move. What do you want in return? The bluntness of her question made him turn to face her fully. Nothing, that's not why I brought you here. Men always want something, she replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than accusing. Silas shook his head. Not this time. No one should have to sell themselves to feed a child. Not here. Not anywhere. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, as if trying to detect the lie in his words. Finally, she gave a small nod and guided Maya toward the bed. The child climbed onto it hesitantly, still clutching a small piece of bread she hadn't finished. Silas busied himself preparing a simple meal, beans, dried meat, and the last of his cornbread. He felt Eleanor's eyes on him as he worked, evaluating his every move. He understood her caution. In her position, he would feel the same. As he set the food on the table, Maya's eyes widened at the sight of a full meal. Eleanor murmured something to her in Apache before helping her to the table. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly in English, the words clearly difficult for her to say to a white man. Silas nodded and took a seat across from them. Eat, we can talk after, if you want. They ate in silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the first few snowflakes that danced past the window. Silas watched as Eleanor made sure Maya ate her fill before taking more than a few bites herself, the instinct of a mother who had gone hungry many times to feed her child. After the meal, Silas cleaned up while Eleanor settled Maya in the bed. The child fell asleep almost immediately, the combination of food and warmth too powerful to resist after what had clearly been a long period of deprivation. Eleanor returned to the table where Silas sat with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one with a nod of thanks. Your brother, Silas began carefully. They say he attacked a homestead. Eleanor's fingers tightened around her cup. Running Bear was hunting. He was nowhere near that homestead. Her eyes lifted to his. But you already suspected this, didn't you? Silas took a sip of his coffee before answering. Let's just say I've seen how justice works in these parts. That is not justice, Eleanor said, a flash of anger breaking through her careful composure. My brother was a good man. He would not attack settlers unprovoked. What happened? Silas asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to trust him. Running Bear was hunting near the ridge. He heard a gunshot, went to investigate, found a dead white man on Thornton's property. Her voice lowered. Before he could leave, men came. They saw him with the body and assumed. They didn't let him speak in his defense? A bitter smile touched her lips. Would they have believed him if he had? Silas had no answer for that. They both knew the truth. Why were you in town today? He asked instead. After what happened to your brother, it was dangerous. Desperation makes us take risks, Eleanor replied. My daughter has not eaten in 2 days. After they took my brother, we had nowhere to go. What about your people? Eleanor's gaze dropped to her hands. My husband died 2 winters ago. The tribe said I had no place without him. No man to speak for me. No food to contribute. She looked up again, defiance in her eyes. I refused to remarry as they wished, so they cast us out. Silas absorbed this information, understanding the impossible situation she had faced. And you've been alone since then? Just you and Maya? She nodded. We survived. Until now. Her eyes met his directly. Now I must ask again, why does a man marked by my people offer shelter to an Apache woman and child? Silas stood, moving to the fire to add another log. The flames illuminated the scar on his face, making it more prominent in the flickering light. Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything, he said finally. To have nowhere to go. Eleanor watched him, waiting for him to continue. When he didn't, she changed direction. You know of Moonlight Valley. Were you there? The log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. Yes, Silas said, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. I was there. As a soldier? Scout. Cavalry scout. He turned to face her. Does that matter now? Eleanor stood as well, moving closer until she stood an arm's length away. She studied his face, particularly the scar. It matters because I need to know if you were one of those who tried to stop it or one who participated. Silas met her gaze steadily. I tried to stop it. I failed. Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but a recognition. That is why you bear that scar. You stood against your own people. It wasn't a question, but Silas nodded anyway. Too little, too late. They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of shared history hanging between them. Outside, the snow had begun to fall in earnest, thick flakes illuminated in the window's glow. A storm is coming, Silas said finally, breaking the tension. You and your daughter should stay until it passes. And after? Eleanor asked. After is for you to decide. Silas moved away, giving her space. But no one will force you to leave. Eleanor glanced at Maya, sleeping peacefully in the bed, then back to Silas. We will stay until the storm passes, she agreed quietly. As if in response, the wind howled louder outside, rattling the windows as the snowstorm embraced the small cabin in its frigid arms. Inside, an uneasy truce had formed. Not trust, not yet, but a mutual recognition of shared pain and the possibility of something beyond mere survival. The blizzard hit with unexpected fury, trapping them inside the cabin for 3 days. Silas slept in the chair by the fire, giving Eleanor and Maya the bed. During daylight hours, he spent time in the barn tending to the animals, deliberately providing Eleanor space and privacy. On the 4th morning, Silas woke to silence. The storm had finally passed. He opened the door to find the world transformed, buried under 3 feet of pristine snow that sparkled in the early morning sunlight. The air was so cold it burned his lungs with each breath. Inside, he found Maya awake, sitting on the floor near the stove where Eleanor was preparing breakfast. The child watched him with those large, solemn eyes that had yet to warm with trust. Storms passed, Silas said to Eleanor, but the road to town will be impassable for at least a week. Eleanor nodded, continuing to stir the pot of oatmeal. We can leave when it clears, if you prefer. Silas removed his coat, hanging it by the door. No need, you're welcome to stay longer. Maya suddenly pointed to the window, excitement breaking through her usual silence. Horse, she exclaimed, her voice small but clear. Both adults turned in surprise. It was the first word either had heard from the child. Through the window, they could see Silas's bay mare in the corral, moving through the snow. Yes, Silas said, crouching down to Maya's level. That's Sadie. She likes the snow. Maya looked at him directly for the first time, a hint of curiosity replacing fear. Big horse. Eleanor watched the interaction with unconcealed emotion. She has not spoken to anyone but me since we left the tribe, she explained softly. Not one word. Silas gave Maya a gentle smile before standing. Horses are good listeners, sometimes easier to talk to than people. After breakfast, Silas surprised them both by producing a small wooden carving of a horse from his pocket, offering it to Maya. The child accepted it with wide eyes, turning it over in her small hands with wonder. You made this? Eleanor asked. Silas nodded. Had some time during the storm. Thought she might like it. The gesture created a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the cabin. Over the next few days, Maya began to speak more. Never many words, but enough to show she was beginning to feel safe. She followed Silas around when he worked inside, watching his every move with curious eyes, especially when he carved wood in the evenings. Eleanor remained more cautious, but the wariness in her eyes had begun to soften. She took over cooking and mending, refusing to be idle while receiving shelter. One evening, she found the courage to ask the question that had lingered since their first conversation. Will you tell me what happened? At Moonlight Valley? Silas was sitting by the fire, whittling another small figure, his hands stilled. Why would you want to hear that? Because I lost family there, Eleanor replied. Because I need to understand. Silas set aside his carving and stared into the fire. Maya had been asleep for an hour, leaving them alone with the weight of history between them. It was supposed to be a peaceful mission, he began, his voice low. Relocate the village to the reservation. No weapons were to be fired unless attacked first. He paused. But some of the men, they'd lost friends in earlier conflicts. They were looking for revenge, not peace. Eleanor sat perfectly still, listening. It happened at dawn. I was scouting the perimeter when I heard the first shots. His face had gone hard with memory. By the time I got back, it had already started. Women, children, they were shooting everyone. You tried to stop it, Eleanor said. Silas's hand went to his scar unconsciously. I tried, stood between a soldier and a woman with a baby, got this for my trouble. He looked up at her, but I didn't stop anything. The massacre continued. I was just one man. Sometimes one man is all it takes, Eleanor said quietly. One man who stands when others will not. Silas shook his head. Not enough. Not that day. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. There were survivors, Eleanor finally said. Did you know that? A few, Silas acknowledged. I helped some escape into the hills. Eleanor studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. One was a small girl. Her mother had been killed, but the girl survived because a white scout hid her under his coat and carried her to safety. Silas went very still. How do you know that? Because the girl lived to tell the story, Eleanor said simply. She never forgot the man with kind eyes who saved her when everyone else wanted her dead. Understanding dawned slowly on Silas's face. You were there, he whispered. At Moonlight Valley. Eleanor nodded, her eyes never leaving his. I was that girl. The revelation hung in the air between them, reshaping everything that had come before. Silas stared at her, searching her features for the child he had carried to safety so many years ago. I didn't know, he said finally. I never knew what happened to you after. I was found by survivors, raised by my aunt. Eleanor's voice grew softer. I never forgot your face, even before the scar. Is that why you trusted me enough to come here? I did not trust you, Eleanor corrected him. I was desperate, but when I saw your scar, I wondered if the man who once saved a child might do so again. Silas looked away, unable to bear the weight of her gaze. I'm not a hero, Eleanor. That day, it haunts me. all the people I couldn't save. Yet you saved one, she said, and now, perhaps two. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling around the corners of the cabin. Inside, something had shifted. A connection formed through shared history and pain that neither had expected to find. You should get some rest, Silas said finally. Tomorrow will be cold. Eleanor stood but paused before heading to the bed. Thank you, she said, for then and for now. After she had gone, Silas remained by the fire, staring into the dying embers. The journal sat on the shelf nearby, filled with his darkest memories. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to open it, to punish himself with images of the past. Instead, he found himself thinking of a small wooden horse, a child's first word in months, and the extraordinary coincidence, or perhaps providence, that had brought Eleanor back into his life. Not for redemption, he didn't believe in such things, but perhaps for something simpler. The chance to do right where once he had failed. He slept that night without nightmares for the first time in years. The following weeks brought a routine that seemed to settle around them like the snow that blanketed the landscape. December arrived with shorter days and nights so cold that frost formed on the inside of the cabin windows. Silas spent mornings tending to the animals and chopping wood, while Eleanor kept the cabin in order and prepared meals from their limited stores. Maya was the one who changed most visibly. The fearful, silent child slowly gave way to a curious girl who followed Silas around the small property, asking questions in her soft voice that grew more confident each day. She particularly loved visiting the horses in the barn, where Silas would lift her onto Sadie's back for short rides around the corral. She smiles now, Eleanor remarked one evening as they watched Maya play with several wooden animals Silas had carved. I had almost forgotten what her smile looked like. Silas glanced at Eleanor, noticing the way the firelight softened her features. In these quiet moments, he could see traces of the child he had saved so long ago, a connection that still bewildered him with its improbability. Children are resilient, he replied, more than adults sometimes. Yes, Eleanor agreed. They have not yet learned to hold on to pain the way we do. Silas's hand went to his scar, a habit he wasn't aware of until he caught Eleanor watching the gesture. He lowered his hand quickly, but something in her expression told him she had recognized the unconscious movement as a physical manifestation of carrying old wounds. I should check the stores, he said, standing abruptly. See what we might need when the road clears. Silas, Eleanor said his name softly, stopping him before he could retreat. You don't have to hide your pain from us. We carry our own. He paused, unused to such direct acknowledgement. Most people in town averted their eyes from his scar, pretending not to notice the visible mark of violence on his face. Eleanor did the opposite. She looked directly at it, recognizing it as part of who he was without judgment. Old habits, he finally said. Been alone a long time. As have we, she replied, glancing at Maya, but perhaps not anymore. The implication hung in the air between them, not a commitment, but a possibility. Silas didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded and continued to the storage area to check their supplies. Some emotions were still too complicated to voice aloud. 2 days later, the temperature rose enough to begin melting the snow on the southern slopes. Silas decided it was time to attempt the journey into town for supplies before the next storm hit. Eleanor watched him prepare the wagon with visible apprehension. The people there, she said as he hitched Sadie to the wagon, they will not have forgotten who I am, who Maya is. I'll be fine, Silas assured her. I'm just getting supplies. They will ask questions. Silas turned to face her fully. Let them ask. I don't answer to them. Eleanor studied him for a moment. Be careful. Sheriff Thornton is not a man who forgets. I know his kind, Silas replied, his voice hardening slightly. I've dealt with worse. Before he could climb onto the wagon, Maya ran from the cabin, clutching something in her small hand. For you, she said, holding up a simple braided cord made from threads she had pulled from a blanket. Protection. Silas knelt to accept the gift, surprised by the lump that formed in his throat. Thank you, little one, he said, tying it around his wrist. I'll wear it proudly. Maya nodded solemnly, then ran back to the cabin where Eleanor stood watching, a complex emotion in her eyes that Silas couldn't quite decipher. The journey to Whispering Pines took longer than usual with the partially melted snow creating muddy conditions on the trail. By the time Silas arrived, the town was bustling with others who had been similarly snowbound and needed supplies. He tied Sadie outside Crawford's general store and entered to find Ezra engaged in conversation with several townsfolk. The talk quieted as Silas entered, replaced by stares and whispers that made his purpose clear. He was the subject of their discussion. "Silas," Ezra greeted him with forced cheerfulness. "Good to see you survived the storm." "Takes more than snow to put me under," Silas replied, approaching the counter. "Need the usual, plus extra flour and coffee if you've got it." Ezra nodded and began gathering items while the other customers found reasons to linger, watching Silas with undisguised curiosity. He ignored them, focusing on his list until a voice broke the uncomfortable silence. "Heard you took in some strays, Harrington." Silas turned to see Jenkins, the deputy who had confronted him and Eleanor weeks earlier. The man leaned against a barrel, trying to appear casual, though his hand rested too close to his holstered pistol. "News travels fast for a town that was snowed in," Silas observed. "Word gets around," Jenkins replied, "especially when it's about a man harboring the sister of a hanged murderer." Several customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. Silas maintained a calm exterior, though he felt a familiar tension building in his shoulders, the prelude to violence he had known too many times. "I don't recall asking for opinions on my business," he said evenly. "Becomes everyone's business when you bring danger to town," Jenkins pressed. "Sheriff says those Apache have blood on their hands." "Careful, deputy," Silas warned, his voice lowering. "You're stepping into matters you don't understand." "I understand plenty," Jenkins sneered. "I understand some men forget which side." "That'll be $4.20, Ezra interrupted loudly, placing the last of Silas's supplies on the counter. "Got some fresh tobacco, too, if you're interested." The intervention broke the moment. Silas paid for his goods, including the tobacco, though he rarely smoked, and began loading his purchases into a crate. "A word before you go, Silas," Ezra asked, gesturing toward the back room. Once they were alone among the store's reserves, Ezra dropped his shopkeeper's smile. "You need to be careful," he said in a hushed tone. "Town's been talking about nothing but you and that Apache woman since the storm cleared." "Let them talk," Silas replied. "Words don't bother me." "It's not just talk." Ezra glanced toward the door to ensure they weren't overheard. "Marshal Thornton's been asking questions, digging into your past, and he's been meeting privately with a group of men who don't normally seek his company." Silas frowned. "What kind of questions?" "About your time in the cavalry, about Moonlight Valley." The name hit Silas like a physical blow. Few people here knew about his connection to that massacre. He had never spoken of it openly. "How does he know about that?" he asked, his voice rough. Ezra shook his head. "Don't know, but he's using it to turn opinion against you, saying you've always had unnatural sympathies for the Apache." Silas absorbed this information, understanding the danger it presented, not just to him but to Eleanor and Maya. "Anything else I should know?" "Samuel Thornton, the sheriff's brother. He's been acting strange since the hanging, drinking heavily, getting into fights. Heard him shouting about finishing what was started last night at the saloon." "You think he's planning something?" "I think you should watch your back," Ezra advised, "and maybe consider whether harboring that woman and child is worth the trouble it's bringing." Silas studied his friend for a moment. "Would you turn away a hungry child, Ezra, a desperate mother with nowhere to go?" Ezra sighed. "You know I wouldn't, but I also wouldn't paint a target on my back." "Sometimes the target finds you whether you want it or not," Silas replied. "I appreciate the warning." As Silas loaded his supplies into the wagon, he felt eyes on him from every direction. From windows, from the saloon porch, from passing townsfolk who no longer offered greetings. The town had turned against him, or at least grown suspicious, in the weeks since he'd taken in Eleanor and Maya. He was preparing to climb onto the wagon when a familiar figure emerged from the sheriff's office across the street. Marshal Thornton stood on the boardwalk, watching Silas with an expression that contained something beyond mere dislike, a calculating hatred that made Silas's instincts sharpen. Rather than avoid the confrontation, Silas secured his supplies and walked directly across the muddy street toward the lawman. Better to face threats head-on than wonder when they might strike from behind. "Sheriff," he greeted, stopping at the base of the boardwalk steps. "Harrington," Thornton replied, not bothering to disguise his contempt. "Surprised to see you in town. Thought you might be too busy with your new household. Just getting supplies, Silas said evenly. Heard you've been asking questions about me. Thornton smiled coldly. Man in my position should know who's in his jurisdiction, especially men with complicated histories. My history is my own. Is it? Thornton stepped down so they stood eye to eye. Word is you were at Moonlight Valley, that you interfered with military justice there, same as you're interfering with civilian justice now. Silas kept his face impassive, though his pulse quickened. Careful, Marshal. You're treading on ground you don't understand. Oh, I understand plenty, Thornton replied, his voice hardening. I understand that you're harboring the sister of a murderer. I understand that blood ties run deep among savages. And I understand that a man who betrayed his own kind once might do it again. Is that a threat? Silas asked quietly. Call it a friendly warning, Thornton said, though there was nothing friendly in his tone. That woman's brother killed a man on my family's land. Justice was served, but some folks think more justice might be needed. Your brother's land, Silas corrected, and some might question what really happened there. Something dangerous flashed in Thornton's eyes. Questioning the law is a risky business, Harrington. Men have been found guilty of worse. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Around them, the town had gone oddly still, as if holding its breath. I'll keep that in mind, Silas said finally. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have supplies to get home. As he turned to go, Thornton called after him, Give my regards to the squaw. Tell her we haven't forgotten her brother's crimes. Silas's steps faltered, the insult and threat striking their intended mark, but he continued to his wagon without looking back. The journey home would be long enough without adding a jail cell to his troubles. Eleanor was waiting on the porch when he returned, her face tight with worry that eased slightly when she saw him approach unharmed. She helped unload the supplies while Maya hovered nearby, clutching the wooden horse Silas had carved. The town, Eleanor said once they were inside. How bad? Silas considered lying, but discarded the notion. She deserved the truth. Bad enough. Sheriff's been asking questions. About me. About Moonlight Valley. Eleanor's eyes widened. How does he know? That's what concerns me, Silas replied, removing his coat. Not many do. Those who were there mostly don't talk about it. What else? She pressed, reading his expression. His brother, Samuel Thornton, has been making threats. Drinking, talking about finishing what was started. Eleanor's face hardened. The man whose land Running Bear was found on. Silas nodded. Something isn't right about this whole situation. Ezra, my friend at the store, says Samuel's been acting strangely since the hanging. Almost guilty. Because he is guilty, Eleanor said with sudden intensity. Running Bear told me before they took him. He saw Samuel Thornton kill that farmhand himself. Silas stilled. Are you certain? My brother would not lie, Eleanor insisted. He saw Samuel shoot the man during an argument. When Samuel realized he was witnessed, he raised the alarm, claiming Apache attack. The pieces began to align in Silas's mind. The rushed hanging, the sheriff's personal involvement, the continued threats. They framed your brother to cover a murder, he said slowly, and they're afraid you know the truth. I didn't, Eleanor admitted. Not until Running Bear told me when I was allowed to see him before the hanging. He made me promise to take Maya and run. Why didn't you tell me this before? Silas asked, though he already knew the answer. Would you have believed an Apache woman over the word of a white sheriff? Eleanor countered. Even now, would the town believe me? The answer hung unspoken between them. They both knew the reality of justice in the territories. Maya had wandered to the window, peering out at the darkening sky. Snow coming, she announced, her small voice breaking the tension. Silas joined her at the window. Sure enough, heavy clouds were gathering on the horizon, promising another storm. We have enough supplies now, he assured her. We'll be warm and fed. Will the bad men come? Maya asked, looking up at him with those solemn eyes that had seen too much for her young age. Silas exchanged a glance with Eleanor, understanding passing between them. If they do, he said gently, I won't let them hurt you or your mother. Promise, Wasdo? Maya held up her small hand, pinky extended, a gesture she must have learned before her world fell apart. Silas knelt and linked his rough pinky with her tiny one. Promise. That night, after Maya had fallen asleep, Silas and Eleanor sat by the fire, speaking in low voices to avoid waking the child. "We should leave when the weather clears," Eleanor said. "Go north, perhaps. Find another tribe that might take us in." "Winter travel is dangerous," Silas countered, "especially with a child. You should wait until spring." "And put you at further risk?" Eleanor shook her head. "The town already turns against you. If they learn what I know about Samuel Thornton—" "They won't," Silas assured her. "But there's something else we need to consider. If what your brother saw is true, Samuel Thornton is a murderer protected by his brother's badge. That makes him dangerous not just to you, but to anyone who gets in his way." Eleanor studied him in the firelight. "You believe me then? About what Running Bear witnessed?" "I believe your brother was hanged without a fair trial," Silas said carefully. "I believe the Thorntons are hiding something. And I believe you and Maya are in danger as long as they think you might expose the truth. Then you understand why we must leave." "I understand why you think you must," Silas corrected. "But running won't solve this. The Thorntons will find someone else to blame for their crimes. More innocent people will suffer." "What would you have me do?" Eleanor asked, a hint of frustration entering her voice. "I am one woman with a child. My word means nothing against theirs." "Not alone," Silas agreed, "but there might be others who suspect the truth. Ezra mentioned Samuel has been acting guilty. If there's evidence—" "You want to prove my brother's innocence," Eleanor realized. "Why would you take such a risk for us?" Silas was silent for a long moment, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Finally, he looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "Because I failed once before. At Moonlight Valley, I tried to stop the killing, but I wasn't strong enough, wasn't fast enough. People died because I hesitated." "You saved me," Eleanor reminded him softly. "One child, when I should have saved dozens." His voice had grown rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to express. "I've carried that failure every day since. And now you seek redemption through us?" There was no accusation in her tone, only a genuine attempt to understand. "Not redemption," Silas shook his head. "Just the chance to do what's right this time. To not walk away when standing is required." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "My people have a saying, the circle continues until someone breaks it. Your brother said something similar, before they hanged him. It means that violence begets violence, hatred begets hatred, until someone chooses a different path." Eleanor leaned forward, her face earnest in the firelight. "Are you certain this is not just another circle of violence you seek to create?" "I don't want violence," Silas replied, "but justice sometimes demands standing firm, even when standing brings risk." Outside, the first snowflakes of the new storm began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. Inside, two people from opposing worlds found themselves allied by circumstance and a shared desire for justice that transcended their differences. "We will wait until spring," Eleanor finally decided, "but we will be watchful. At the first sign of danger to Maya, we leave, evidence or no evidence." "Agreed," Silas nodded. "And I'll start asking careful questions. See what I can learn about what really happened on the Thornton property." As if to seal their pact, Eleanor reached across the space between them and gently touched the scar on Silas's face, a gesture so unexpected that he nearly flinched. Her fingers were warm against the ridged tissue. "This mark does not define you," she said softly, "nor do past failures. It is what you choose now that matters." Silas remained still under her touch, unaccustomed to such gentleness. When she withdrew her hand, something had shifted between them, trust deepening into something more complex that neither was prepared to name. "We should rest," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Storm's coming in strong." Eleanor nodded and rose to join Maya in the bed, leaving Silas alone with the fire and thoughts that kept him awake long into the night. The days that followed brought another heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch once more. December deepened toward Christmas, a holiday Silas had not celebrated in years, but found himself considering for Maya's sake. One afternoon, while Eleanor was teaching the child to sew, he slipped away to the forest edge and cut a small pine tree, setting it up in the corner of the cabin. Maya's eyes widened when she saw it. "What is it for?" she asked, circling the tree with fascination. "Christmas," Silas explained. "It's a celebration that happens this time of year." Eleanor watched them from across the room, her expression a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "We do not observe this holiday," she said carefully. I know, Silas acknowledged, but I thought. He stopped, suddenly uncertain. I should have asked first. I can take it back out. No, Eleanor said, seeing Maya's face fall at the suggestion. It is good for her to learn different ways. Will you show us your tradition? Relief flooded through him. It's been a long time since I celebrated properly, he admitted. But we can decorate the tree with things we find. Pine cones, berries, maybe some carved ornaments. Over the next few days, Silas worked with Maya to create simple decorations. Eleanor contributed as well, weaving small baskets from pine needles to hang on the branches. The activity brought a lightness to their interactions that had been missing before, a sense of building something together rather than merely coexisting. In the evenings, Silas found himself telling stories he hadn't thought of in years. Tales from his childhood in Pennsylvania, memories of Christmases before the war changed everything. Eleanor shared some of her people's winter traditions in return, speaking of ceremonies to honor the turning of seasons and the return of longer days. Your people mark time by the sun and moon, Silas observed one evening. Mine use calendars and clocks. But we all watch the same skies. The differences between us are made by men, Eleanor replied. The similarities are given by the earth. On Christmas Eve, Silas presented Maya with a special gift, a small wooden doll he had carved in secret moments. The child's face illuminated with joy as she clutched it to her chest. What do you say? Eleanor prompted gently. Thank you, Maya said, then surprised both adults by climbing into Silas's lap and wrapping her small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. Silas froze momentarily, then carefully returned the embrace, his large hand patting her back awkwardly. Over Maya's head, his eyes met Eleanor's, and he saw a sheen of tears. She quickly blinked away. Later, after Maya had fallen asleep with her new doll clutched tight, Eleanor approached Silas as he sat by the fire. In her hands, she held something wrapped in a small piece of cloth. For you, she said, holding it out. It is not much. Silas accepted the bundle and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a beautifully crafted leather sheath for his hunting knife, decorated with intricate beadwork in blue and white patterns. Eleanor, he breathed, running his fingers over the detailed work. I don't know what to say. You have given us shelter, food, safety, she said simply, a small token in return. It's beautiful, he told her, meaning it. When did you make this? While you slept, she answered with a small smile. You sleep deeply after working all day. Silas felt a pang of guilt. I don't have anything for you. You have given enough, Eleanor assured him, but Silas shook his head. No, I want to. He paused, then went to the shelf where he kept his few personal possessions. From a small wooden box, he withdrew a silver brooch in the shape of a bird, simple but finely made. This was my mother's, he explained, returning to offer it to her. She said it was a swallow, a bird that always returns home. Eleanor hesitated. I cannot accept something so personal. Please, Silas insisted. It's been in that box for years. It should be worn, not hidden away. After a moment's consideration, Eleanor accepted the brooch, pinning it to her dress with careful fingers. I will treasure it, she promised. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire's dancing light. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside the cabin, a fragile peace had settled, a moment of warmth in the coldest season. I never thought I would celebrate a white man's holiday, Eleanor admitted quietly, or feel at peace in a white man's home. And I never thought I'd share my home with anyone again, Silas replied. Life takes unexpected turns. Eleanor studied him in the firelight. You lived alone by choice. Why? Silas's expression shuddered slightly. Seems safer that way, for everyone? Because of what happened after Moonlight Valley, she asked, her perception uncomfortably accurate. He nodded slowly. After the massacre, there were reprisals. Apache warriors attacked settlements in revenge. His voice lowered. One of those settlements was where I'd left my wife and son while I was scouting. Eleanor's breath caught. Silas. Rose and Thomas, he continued, the names painful in his mouth after so long unspoken. Thomas wasn't even a year old. I came home to find. He couldn't finish the sentence. The circle of violence, Eleanor whispered, understanding in her eyes. You lost your family to my people's vengeance, just as I lost mine to yours. That's why I bought this land, Silas admitted. Far enough from town, far enough from reservations, a place where I wouldn't have to face either world. Yet here we are, Eleanor observed, both worlds under one roof. Silas looked at her directly. Does it anger you, knowing what happened to my family, yet seeing me help you and Maya? Does it anger you, Eleanor countered, knowing your family died at Apache hands, yet offering shelter to Apache women? No, Silas answered honestly. I never blamed your people as a whole, just as you don't blame all white men for Moonlight Valley. The guilty are those who choose violence, Eleanor agreed, not those born to one tribe or another. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. In the momentary brightness, Silas saw Eleanor not just as a woman he had taken in from necessity, but as someone who understood his pain in ways few others could, who had walked a parallel path of loss and survival. We should rest, Eleanor said, breaking the intimate moment. Tomorrow is your Christmas day. Silas nodded, though sleep seemed unlikely with so many buried emotions brought to the surface. As Eleanor rose to join Maya in the bed, she paused beside his chair, then leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to his scarred cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for making this a home, not just shelter. Before he could respond, she had moved away, leaving him with the lingering warmth of her lips on his skin and a confusion of feelings he hadn't experienced in years. Christmas Day brought clear skies and sunshine that turned the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling white expanse. Silas rose early, tending to the animals with a strange lightness in his chest, despite the heavy conversation of the previous night. Sharing his deepest pain had not brought the expected anguish. Instead, it felt like setting down a burden he had carried too long alone. He returned to find Eleanor and Maya already awake, the cabin warm with the smell of cornbread baking in the cast-iron stove. Maya ran to him immediately, wooden doll in one hand and a drawing in the other. Look, she exclaimed, thrusting the paper toward him. I made our family. Silas froze at the word family, his eyes going to the crude drawing. 3 figures stood hand in hand, a tall man with what appeared to be a line on his face, a woman with long dark hair, and a small child between them. It's beautiful, Maya, he managed, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't express. Eleanor watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. Maya, she called gently, come help me with the bread. The child skipped away, leaving Silas to gather himself. He hung his coat by the door, the drawing still in his hand, unsure what to do with the unexpected gift and all it implied. She has a child's understanding, Eleanor said quietly when Maya was occupied with setting the table. Do not let it trouble you. It doesn't trouble me, Silas replied, surprising himself with the truth of it. It's just been a long time since anyone thought of me as family. Before Eleanor could respond, a sound from outside caught their attention. The distant but unmistakable approach of horses. Silas moved to the window, scanning the snow-covered path that led to the main road. In the distance, he could make out 2 riders approaching slowly through the deep snow. Stay inside, he instructed, reaching for his rifle. Both of you. Who is it? Eleanor asked, pulling Maya close to her side. Can't tell yet, Silas replied, but no one rides out this far on Christmas Day for social calls. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not raised, and waited as the riders approached. As they drew closer, he recognized Ezra Montgomery on one horse. The other rider was a stranger, a thin man with a city suit partially visible under his heavy coat. Silas, Ezra called as they reached the yard. Sorry to intrude on your holiday. Bit far from town on Christmas, Ezra, Silas replied, not lowering his rifle. What brings you out? Ezra dismounted, leading his horse the final few yards. The stranger followed, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the cold. This is Mr. Richard Holloway, Ezra introduced the man. He's a lawyer from Denver, just arrived on yesterday's stage. Silas frowned. A lawyer? What business would a Denver lawyer have with me? Holloway stepped forward, removing his glove to extend his hand. Mr. Harrington, I believe I have information that may be of great interest to you, and to the Apache woman I'm told is in your care. Silas did not take the offered hand. What information? Perhaps we could discuss this in Shin, Holloway suggested, shivering slightly. It's a rather complex matter. Silas hesitated, then glanced at Ezra. You vouch for him? I do, Ezra nodded. Heard him out last night. You'll want to listen, Silas. After a moment's consideration, Silas lowered his rifle. Tie your horses to the post. You can come in, but I'll keep this rifle close. Understandable caution, Holloway acknowledged with a thin smile. I assure you my visit is potentially to your benefit. Inside, Eleanor stood protectively in front of Maya, her posture tense as the strangers entered. Silas made quick introductions, noting the wariness in Eleanor's eyes that mirrored his own. Mr. Holloway claims to have information concerning us, Silas explained, gesturing for the men to sit at the table while he remained standing, rifle within reach. Not claims, Mr. Harrington, Holloway corrected, removing papers from an inner pocket of his coat. I have documented evidence regarding the circumstances of Running Bear's death and the subsequent attempt to frame him for murder. Eleanor stepped forward at this, her composure briefly broken by surprise. What evidence? Who sent you? Holloway arranged several documents on the table. I represent the Western Mining Consortium. 6 months ago, they engaged me to investigate land titles in this region, specifically looking for properties that might be acquired for mining operations. What does this have to do with Running Bear? Eleanor demanded. Patience, madam, Holloway replied. During my investigation, I discovered that several parcels of land, including the Thornton property where the alleged attack took place, sit upon a significant copper deposit. This deposit was officially discovered just 3 weeks before the incident that led to your brother's hanging. Silas and Eleanor exchanged glances, beginning to understand the implications. Furthermore, Holloway continued, I uncovered correspondence between Sheriff Marshall Thornton and representatives of the Copper Valley Mining Company discussing the potential sale of his brother's land, contingent upon resolving certain territorial disputes with local Apache who still occasionally hunted in the area. They wanted the Apache gone from that land, Silas said slowly, to clear the way for mining. Precisely, Holloway nodded. But there was a complication. The land treaties signed with the Apache Nation 5 years ago specifically protected traditional hunting grounds, including the ridge where the Thornton property is located. So they created a reason to violate the treaty, Eleanor concluded, her voice tight with controlled anger. They killed a man and blamed my brother to justify removing Apache rights to the land. Holloway slid a document across the table. This is a sworn statement from the farmhand who allegedly witnessed the attack, except he didn't die as was reported. He was paid to disappear and is currently living in Missouri under a new name. Silas picked up the paper, scanning it quickly. How did you find him? My job involves following money, Holloway explained. A significant sum was transferred from the Thorntons' account to this man just days before the incident. I located him and, with appropriate financial persuasion, obtained his testimony. And he admits there was no attack? Eleanor pressed. He admits that Samuel Thornton shot another worker during an argument, then concocted the story of an Apache attack when they realized Running Bear had witnessed the murder from the ridge where he was hunting. Holloway's expression was grim. They needed a scapegoat, and an Apache witness to a white man's crime was an inconvenience that became an opportunity. The cabin fell silent as they absorbed this information. Maya had retreated to the corner with her doll, sensing the tension but not understanding its cause. Why bring this to us? Silas finally asked. Why now? My clients wish to acquire mining rights legally, Holloway replied. The fraudulent narrative created by the Thorntons complicates matters. Clearing Running Bear's name and exposing the Thorntons' crimes serves both justice and my client's interests. Convenient morality, Eleanor observed coldly. Holloway shrugged. Justice and profit need not be enemies, madam. The question is what you wish to do with this information. Silas set the document down. What exactly are you proposing? I will present this evidence to the territorial judge when he arrives next week, Holloway explained. But the testimony would be stronger with Eleanor's account of what her brother told her before his execution. Eleanor stiffened. You want me to testify? To stand before a white court? It would be dangerous, Silas said, understanding her fear. The Thorntons won't surrender their power easily. Hence why I came directly to you rather than presenting this publicly first, Holloway acknowledged. You need time to consider the risks and prepare accordingly. Ezra, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Silas, there's more you should know. After Mr. Holloway shared this with me last night, I overheard Samuel Thornton at the saloon. He was drunk, talking about taking care of loose ends before the judge arrives. He mentioned your ranch specifically. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold settled over Silas. How soon? He was gathering men, Ezra said grimly. I rode out as soon as I could slip away. They might be only hours behind us. Eleanor moved swiftly to Maya, gathering the child into her arms. We must leave now. The trails are deep with snow, Silas countered. You wouldn't make it far, especially with Maya. And if we stay, Eleanor challenged, they will kill us all. The reality of their situation hung heavy in the cabin. Threat approaching, escape difficult, confrontation seemingly inevitable. Christmas Day had brought not peace, but the precipice of violence none of them had sought. Silas looked from Eleanor and Maya to the documents on the table, evidence of corruption and murder that had already claimed one innocent life. The circle of violence spinning onward, unless someone chose to break it. We don't run, he said finally, decision crystallizing in his mind. But we don't wait helplessly either. It's time to end this, the right way. As if in answer, the wind picked up outside, carrying the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats through the snowy landscape. Time had run out for deliberation. The moment for action had arrived. The approaching hoofbeats grew louder, cutting through the crisp winter air. Silas moved with practiced efficiency, years of military training surfacing in his methodical preparations. He checked his rifle, then retrieved a second from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, a weapon few knew he possessed. Ezra, get Eleanor and Maya to the root cellar behind the barn, he instructed, handing the lawyer Holloway his documents. Keep these safe. They're evidence of murder now, and could soon be motive for more. I'm not hiding while you face them alone, Eleanor protested, even as she gathered Maya close. This isn't about bravery, Silas told her firmly. It's about survival. Maya needs you, and those documents need protection. Ezra nodded grimly. He's right, ma'am. The root cellar has a hidden exit that leads to the woods. If things go badly, you can escape that way. Eleanor's eyes met Silas's, a world of unspoken emotions passing between them. This is not your fight alone, she insisted. It became my fight the moment I brought you here, Silas replied. Now go, please. Maya broke free from her mother's grasp and ran to Silas, wrapping her small arms around his legs. Don't let the bad men take you, she whispered, her eyes wide with a fear born of too many losses. Silas knelt, placing his hands on her shoulders. Remember the promise I made? I keep my promises, little one. He slipped the wooden horse from his pocket and pressed it into her palm. Hold this. As long as you have it, I'll come back to you. The child clutched the carving tightly, then allowed her mother to lead her away. Eleanor paused at the door, looking back once. Be careful, Silas. The circle must be broken, not continued. I know, he assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Could justice be achieved without further bloodshed? The approaching riders suggested otherwise. Once they had gone, Holloway turned to Silas with a nervous expression. I'm not a fighting man, Mr. Harrington. What would you have me do? Stay inside, away from windows, Silas instructed. If shooting starts, get on the floor and stay there. The lawyer nodded, retreating to a corner of the cabin. Silas stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready, but not raised. The winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered yard as 6 riders emerged from the tree line. Samuel Thornton led them, his resemblance to his sheriff brother unmistakable, despite his younger age and the unkempt beard that partially covered his face. Even from a distance, Silas could see the man was half drunk, swaying slightly in his saddle. Behind him rode Deputy Jenkins and 4 other men, local troublemakers Silas recognized from town. Silas's mind shifted into the tactical awareness he'd developed during the war. The snow offered limited cover, the water trough to his right, the corner of the cabin to his left. The distance to the barn was 30 yards of open ground. If shooting started, his position on the porch was exposed. Better to draw them in closer, reduce their advantage of numbers by forcing them to bunch up. That's far enough, Silas called when they were 20 yards out. State your business. Samuel Thornton reined his horse to a stop, the others following suit. His laugh carried across the yard. Business? That's rich coming from an Indian lover harboring murderers. No murderers here, Silas replied evenly. Just a woman and child seeking shelter. That squaw's brother killed my farmhand, Samuel snarled, and she knows things she shouldn't. We've come to escort her back to town for questioning. 6 armed men for 1 woman? Seems excessive. Jenkins spoke up. Sheriff sent us official bike. You'd be obstructing justice to refuse. If the sheriff wanted to question her, he could have come himself, Silas observed, with a proper warrant. The men behind Samuel exchanged glances. One leaned over to whisper something to another, who shook his head slightly. Silas noted the hesitation. They weren't as committed as their leader. We didn't ride all this way through snow to argue law with you, Harrington, Samuel said, his patience visibly thinning. Hand over the squaw and her brat, and we'll forget how you've been harboring them. Silas didn't move. And if I refuse? Samuel's hand moved to his holstered pistol. Then we take them anyway and maybe bury you in a snowdrift while we're at it. The threat hung in the cold air, tension building like the pressure before a storm. Silas measured distances, counted weapons, calculated odds, all the automatic assessments of a man who had survived combat. 6 against 1, with innocent lives in the balance. Not good odds, but he'd faced worse at Shiloh, at Antietam, at Moonlight Valley. He thought of Eleanor's words. The circle must be broken. Violence begetting violence was the easy path, the expected one. It would be simple to aim center mass to end Samuel's threats permanently, but that would only perpetuate the cycle of bloodshed that had already claimed Running Bear's life. There's something you should know before you make this mistake, Silas said, his voice carrying clearly in the winter stillness. I know what really happened on your property, Samuel. I know about the copper deposit, the mining company, and the farmhand who isn't dead after all. The effect was immediate. Samuel's face drained of color, and the other men exchanged confused glances. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. What the hell is he talking about, Sam? One of the men asked. Peterson, who ran the livery stable in town. He's talking nonsense, Samuel snapped, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Don't listen to his lies. It's documented, Silas continued, pressing his advantage. Sworn testimony from the man you paid to disappear. A paper trail leading straight back to you and your brother. The territorial judge arrives next week. What do you think he'll make of a second murder to cover up the first? Sam, Jenkins said slowly, you told us this was about bringing in a murdering Indian. You didn't say nothing about copper or missing farmhands. Shut up, Jenkins, Samuel hissed. He's trying to confuse you. Silas took a calculated risk, stepping forward. There was no attack. There was a white man's greed and a convenient scapegoat. Running Bear was innocent, and you hanged him to hide your crime. The other riders began to murmur among themselves, doubt spreading like ripples in still water. Peterson looked from Samuel to Silas, then back again. This true, Sam? We hang an innocent man? Of course not, Samuel insisted, though panic had begun to edge his voice. There was an Apache attack. We all know what they're capable of. Then why are you sweating in the middle of winter? Another man asked. Silas watched the fragile alliance unraveling. These men had come expecting straightforward violence against a target they'd been taught to view as less than human. Instead, they were confronting the possibility that they'd been manipulated into supporting a murder and cover-up. The lawyer inside has the proof, Silas continued. Proof that's already been copied and sent to the territorial capital. Killing us won't bury this truth, Samuel. It's over. For a moment, it seemed the tension might dissipate. 2 of the riders at the fire actually turned their horses, apparently unwilling to participate in whatever was unfolding. Then Samuel, desperate and cornered, did exactly what Silas feared he might. He fired. The shot went wide, kicking up snow several feet from where Silas stood. It was all the provocation needed for chaos to erupt. Jenkins and another man drew their weapons, while the remaining 2 turned to flee. Silas dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. Get him, Samuel screamed, firing wildly. Kill him and find that squaw! The years melted away as Silas's combat instincts took over. The heightened awareness, the ability to track multiple threats simultaneously, the calculated breathing that steadied his aim. But this time there was a crucial difference. In war he had killed without questioning. Today he sought another way. Silas returned fire with measured precision, aiming not to kill but to disable. His first shot caught Jenkins in the shoulder, spinning the deputy from his saddle. His second struck the horse of the man beside Samuel, causing the animal to rear and throw its rider into a snowdrift. Samuel dismounted, using his horse for cover as he advanced toward the cabin, firing as he came. A bullet grazed Silas's arm, tearing his sleeve and drawing blood, but he barely registered the pain through the familiar rush of combat focus. "It's over, Samuel," Silas called out. "Your men are leaving you." It was true, the uninjured riders had retreated to the tree line, unwilling to die for what they now suspected was a lie. Only Samuel pressed on, hatred and fear driving him forward. "I'll burn this place with you in it," he shouted, reaching for something in his saddlebag. A moment later, Silas saw the glass bottle with a cloth wick, a crude firebomb that could easily ignite the wooden cabin. Time slowed as Samuel struck a match, the small flame bright against the snow. Silas had one clear shot, one chance to end this without more bloodshed. He took aim at Samuel's hand, steadied his breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the winter landscape. Samuel screamed as the bullet shattered his wrist, the match and bottle falling harmlessly into the snow. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his wounded hand to his chest, all fight draining from him in an instant. Silas approached cautiously, rifle trained on the sobbing man. "It's over, Samuel. No one else needs to die." "You don't understand," Samuel whimpered. "He'll kill me. My brother will kill me if this gets out." "Then testify against him," Silas suggested, no sympathy in his voice. "Save yourself by telling the truth." A new voice joined the conversation, Holloway emerging from the cabin with papers in hand. "An excellent suggestion, Mr. Thornton. The territorial governor would surely look favorably upon cooperation in exposing such corruption." Samuel's eyes darted between them, the calculations of a desperate man visible on his face. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "He planned it all," he admitted. "Marshall knew about the copper months ago. Said we could be rich if we could just get the Apache off that hunting ground. When my farmhand witnessed me arguing with another worker, things got heated, the gun went off. Marshall said we could turn it to our advantage." "By framing Running Bear," Silas finished. Samuel nodded miserably. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Saw everything from the ridge where he was hunting. Marshall said no one would question an Apache killing anyway. Holloway was scribbling furiously, documenting the confession. And the hanging, the unusually swift execution? Marshall couldn't risk a proper trial. Rushed it through before anyone could ask too many questions. Samuel looked up at Silas, pain and fear making him seem suddenly younger. "I never wanted anyone to die. It just happened." "Things don't just happen," Silas replied coldly. "Men make choices. Running Bear paid for yours with his life." From the direction of the barn, movement caught Silas's attention. Ezra was approaching cautiously, rifle in hand. Behind him, Eleanor emerged, her expression a storm of emotions as she heard Samuel's confession. "Bind his wound," Silas instructed Ezra, turning away from Samuel in disgust. "We'll take him to town once we've rounded up the others." Eleanor stopped a few paces away, her eyes locked on the man who had been instrumental in her brother's death. "Is this justice?" she asked quietly, so only Silas could hear. "One confession? After all the harm done?" "It's a beginning," Silas answered. "The truth exposed. The circle broken." Eleanor studied him for a moment. "You didn't kill him. You could have." "Killing him wouldn't bring Running Bear back," Silas said simply. "More blood would only feed the cycle." A hint of a smile touched her lips, sad but genuine. "Perhaps you understand my people's wisdom better than I gave you credit for." Their moment was interrupted by Ezra calling out in alarm. "Riders coming? At least 10 of them." Silas turned to see a new group emerging from the tree line, led by a familiar figure, Sheriff Marshall Thornton, his badge catching the winter sunlight. The men with him weren't his usual deputies, but ordinary townsmen, the blacksmith, the barber, a handful of ranchers. They looked confused rather than threatening. "Get back to the cellar," Silas urged Eleanor. "This isn't over." "I will not hide any more," she replied firmly, lifting her chin with quiet dignity. "My daughter is safe with your friend. This is my fight too." Memories of Moonlight Valley flashed unbidden through Silas's mind. The smell of gunpowder and blood, the screams of the dying, his own voice shouting futile orders that came too late. He had failed then, hesitated when decisive action was needed. He would not make the same mistake again. Stay behind me, he conceded, knowing Eleanor's resolve was unshakable. If shooting starts, get to cover immediately. Marshal Thornton's voice boomed across the yard. What in God's name is happening here, Harrington? My deputy rode in wounded, babbling about a shootout. The sheriff reined his horse to a stop, taking in the scene. His brother bleeding on the ground, the lawyer with papers in hand, Silas with a bloodied sleeve, and Eleanor standing proud beside him. Your deputy and your brother came to abduct Eleanor and her child, Silas answered. They fired first. Marshall's eyes narrowed as he noticed Holloway. Who's this? Richard Holloway, attorney at law, the lawyer introduced himself, stepping forward with remarkable courage. I represent the Western Mining Consortium and am here investigating fraudulent land claims related to copper deposits on your family property. A flicker of alarm crossed Marshall's face before he masked it with official indignation. I don't know what nonsense you're talking about, but I see a wounded man who needs medical attention. He gestured to two of his men. Get my brother on a horse. We're taking him to town. Not before he finishes his confession, Silas countered, standing his ground. He was just explaining how you orchestrated the framing and hanging of an innocent man to clear Apache hunters from land you knew contained copper. Several of the townsmen who had accompanied Marshall exchanged troubled glances. This was clearly not what they had been told when recruited for the posse. These are serious accusations, Sheriff, said McGinty, the blacksmith, a generally fair-minded individual whose respect carried weight in the community. Baseless slander, Marshall snapped. Harrington's lost his mind, taking up with savages. To Silas's surprise, Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. I am not a savage, Sheriff Thornton. I am a woman who has lost her brother to your greed, a mother who nearly lost her daughter to your lies. The simple dignity of her words created a palpable shift in the atmosphere. The townsmen looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time, and saw not an anonymous squaw, but a human being demanding justice. You think anyone will believe you over me? Marshall sneered, though his confidence seemed to waver. A grief-stricken Apache woman spinning tales? They will believe the evidence, Eleanor replied. They will believe the truth when it is spoken plainly. And what truth is that? Marshall demanded. That my brother witnessed your brother kill a man in anger. That you framed him to hide your crime and clear our people from land you wanted for mining. That you hanged an innocent man and called it justice. Marshall's face darkened with rage. You have no proof. Actually, Holloway interjected, holding up his papers. We have considerable proof, Sheriff. Financial records showing payments to the supposedly dead farmhand. Correspondence between you and mining interests discussing the Apache problem on copper-rich land. And now, your brother's confession. Samuel, still on his knees in the snow, looked up at his older brother with a mixture of fear and resignation. It's over, Marshall. They know everything. The sheriff's composure cracked. Shut your mouth, you drunken fool. No more lies, Samuel said, finding a shred of courage in his desperation. Tell them the truth. Tell them what we did. The townsmen were watching intently now, the story unfolding before them more compelling than any dime novel. McGinty dismounted, followed by several others, moving to stand apart from the sheriff. Marshal Thornton's eyes darted around the yard, taking stock of his rapidly deteriorating position. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, harder, colder, dropping all pretense of lawful authority. You think you're so righteous, he snarled at Silas. A man who helped slaughter women and children at Moonlight Valley? Judging me? At least I only hanged one Apache. How many did you kill that day, Scout? The words struck Silas like physical blows. How do you know about that? He asked, voice suddenly hoarse. A cruel smile twisted Marshall's features. Army records aren't as private as you might think. I made it my business to know about everyone in my jurisdiction, especially those with blood on their hands. The difference, Silas replied, finding his voice again, is that I've spent every day since trying to atone for what happened there, while you've only added to your crimes. Atone? Marshall laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? Bedding down with the enemy's sister? Playing father to a savage brat? Silas felt Eleanor stiffen beside him at the insult to Maya, but before either could respond, McGinty stepped forward. That's enough, Marshall, the blacksmith said firmly. We came because you said there was trouble. Looks to me like you're the trouble. Several other townsmen murmured agreement, moving to stand with McGinty. The balance of power was shifting, the sheriff's authority eroding with each passing moment. Marshall, sensing his control slipping, made a fatal mistake. He drew his pistol and aimed it at his own brother. "You pathetic weakling," he snarled. "I should have known you'd break." "Marshall, don't!" Silas moved forward, but it was too late. The shot echoed across the snowy yard. Samuel collapsed, a red stain blossoming on his chest. For a moment, everyone stood frozen in shock. Even Marshall seemed stunned by his own action. Then chaos erupted. Several townsmen wrestled Marshall from his horse while others rushed to Samuel's aid. Silas kept his rifle trained on the sheriff, ensuring he couldn't fire again, while Holloway clutched his precious documents to his chest and retreated toward the cabin. Eleanor remained still, watching the scene unfold with an expression of grim vindication. When the dust settled, Marshall Thornton was disarmed and restrained by his own posse, his brother bleeding but still alive on the ground, and the truth exposed in the most dramatic fashion possible. "Get Samuel to the doctor," Silas instructed, "and keep the sheriff under guard until the judge arrives." McGinty nodded grimly. "We'll see justice done proper this time, Harrington. You have my word." As they prepared to depart with their prisoners, Silas approached Marshall Thornton, who glared at him with undisguised hatred. "You've ruined everything," the sheriff spat. "Years of work, destroyed because you couldn't mind your own business." "Running Bear was innocent," Silas replied quietly. "That made it my business." "He was just an Apache," Marshall sneered. "They've killed plenty of our people. What's one more savage?" Silas leaned closer, his voice for the sheriff's ears alone. "I was at Moonlight Valley, Thornton. I've seen what happens when men decide whose lives matter and whose don't. That path leads only to more graves." Something flickered in Marshall's eyes, recognition perhaps, or the first inkling that his worldview might be flawed. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold hatred as he was led away. The yard fell silent as the posse departed, taking both Thornton brothers with them. Samuel would likely survive to stand trial, Silas judged, a mixed blessing, as it meant he would have to face the consequences of his actions rather than escape them through death. Ezra approached, his expression somber. "Maya's still in the root cellar. Thought it best to keep her there until things settled." "You did right," Silas nodded, suddenly aware of the ache in his wounded arm. "It's over now, at least this part." Eleanor moved to his side, examining his injury with gentle fingers. "You need this cleaned and bandaged." "It can wait," he began, but she silenced him with a look that brooked no argument. "You have bled enough today," she said firmly. "Inside. Now." Holloway, still clutching his papers, cleared his throat. "I should accompany the prisoners to town, ensure the evidence reaches the proper authorities." "Go with Ezra," Silas agreed. "And thank you. Without your information, this might have ended very differently." The lawyer nodded. "Justice and profit, Mr. Harrington. Sometimes they align more neatly than we expect." After they had gone, Silas allowed Eleanor to lead him inside the cabin. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, incongruously festive amid the aftermath of violence. Eleanor seated him at the table and began cleaning his wound with practiced movements. "Your people have healers," Silas observed, watching her work. "My mother was one," Eleanor replied. "She taught me which plants heal, which harm, how to mend wounds of the body." Her eyes met his. "The wounds of the spirit are harder." "Will this heal them?" Silas asked, meaning more than his physical injury. "Knowing the truth about your brother? Seeing his killers face justice?" Eleanor considered the question as she wrapped clean cloth around his arm. "Healing is not one moment, but many. Today is one such moment. Tomorrow will bring others." "And what of Maya? What will help her heal?" "Safety, love, time." Eleanor secured the bandage with a neat knot. "She has found the first two here. The third will come with each sunrise." Their conversation was interrupted by the cabin door opening. Maya stood there, small and solemn, her eyes searching the room until they found Silas. Without a word, she ran to him, climbing into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck in a fierce embrace. "You kept your promise," she whispered against his shoulder. "The bad men didn't take you." Silas held her carefully, mindful of his injured arm, a lump forming in his throat. "I told you I would come back to you, little one." Over Maya's head, his eyes met Eleanor's, and something passed between them. An understanding, a possibility, a future neither had dared imagine until now. The territorial judge arrived 4 days later, bringing with him a contingent of federal marshals and a flurry of official proceedings that transformed the sleepy town of Whispering Pines. The story of the Thorntons' corruption in the framing of Running Bear spread quickly, drawing journalists from as far as Denver who filled the town's small hotel and boarding houses. The courthouse, normally a quiet building that handled minor disputes and occasional drunk and disorderly cases, became the center of a legal drama that captivated the region. The territorial governor himself sent an observer, recognizing the potential impact of a case involving land rights, mining interests, and injustice against Native Americans. Eleanor testified on the second day of the proceedings, her dignity and composure a stark contrast to Marshall Thornton's increasing belligerence as the evidence against him mounted. She wore the silver swallow brooch Silas had given her, a small touch of elegance that did not go unnoticed by the Eastern journalists in attendance. "Mrs. Eleanor," the prosecutor began, using the honorific that she had not requested but did not refuse, "can you tell the court what your brother, Running Bear, told you before his execution?" Eleanor stood straight, her voice clear and steady. "He told me he had been hunting on the ridge above the Thornton property, as our people have done for generations. He heard a gunshot and went to investigate, thinking another hunter might be in trouble. And what did he witness? He saw Samuel Thornton arguing with one of his workers. The argument became heated. Samuel drew his pistol and shot the man. When he realized Running Bear had seen this, Samuel raised the alarm, claiming an Apache attack. Did your brother attempt to explain what he had witnessed?" Eleanor's eyes flicked briefly to Marshall Thornton, who glared at her from the defendant's table. He tried. No one would listen. The sheriff claimed the evidence was clear, an Apache warrior found near a dead white man. "My brother was hanged the next morning without a proper trial." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Such swift execution, even for a Native American, violated basic territorial law. The judge called for order, his expression grave. "And why did you not come forward with this information sooner?" the prosecutor continued. "Who would believe me?" Eleanor asked simply. "I am Apache. My word against a white sheriff's? Until Mr. Holloway found evidence to support my brother's account, speaking would have only endangered my daughter." From the gallery, Silas watched with quiet pride as Eleanor faced down the hostility and skepticism that still lingered among some spectators. Maya sat beside him, clutching his hand, wide-eyed at the proceedings but drawing strength from his presence. The trial lasted nearly 2 weeks as witness after witnesses came forward. Jenkins, recovering from his shoulder wound, testified that he had been told only that they were apprehending a dangerous Apache woman, with no mention of copper or mining interest. The Territorial Land Office presented records showing the recent discovery of copper deposits on land traditionally used by Apache hunters. Holloway methodically presented financial evidence tracing payments from the Thorntons to the supposedly dead farmhand. But the most damning testimony came from Samuel Thornton himself. Still weak from his wound but desperate to save himself from the gallows, he detailed the entire scheme, from the accidental killing of his worker during an argument to Marshall's plan to frame Running Bear, to the hasty execution designed to silence any questions. "My brother said no one would care about one more dead Apache," Samuel testified, unable to meet Eleanor's gaze from the witness stand. "He said it was God's will that the savages be removed from land that could benefit civilization." Throughout the proceedings, Marshall Thornton maintained his innocence, claiming his brother was lying to save himself. But the evidence was overwhelming. When the judge announced his verdict, guilty on all counts, with a sentence of life imprisonment for Marshall and 20 years for Samuel, a ripple of approval ran through the crowded courtroom. As they left the courthouse after the sentencing, Eleanor paused on the steps, looking back at the building where her brother's name had been cleared. "He can see this," she said quietly. "Wherever his spirit walks, he knows the truth has been spoken." Silas, standing beside her with Maya between them, nodded. "It won't bring him back, but it matters." "It matters," Eleanor agreed. She lifted her face to the winter sun, letting its pale light wash over her features. "Where do we go now, Silas Harrington?" It was the question that had hung unspoken between them through the trials and testimonies. With justice served and danger past, what reason remained for them to stay together? The temporary shelter he had offered had fulfilled its purpose. Eleanor and Maya were no longer desperate fugitives. They could go anywhere, start anew. "Where do you want to go?" Silas asked, not quite meeting her eyes. Eleanor studied him, reading the uncertainty in his posture. "Maya has asked if we will return to our home, your cabin." "It's not much of a home," he said carefully. "A bachelor's quarters, hardly suitable for—" "It became a home when you opened your door to us," Eleanor interrupted. "When you carved wooden animals for a silent child. When you brought in a Christmas tree for a family that did not celebrate your holiday." Silas finally looked at her directly, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Are you saying you want to stay?" "I am saying," Eleanor replied deliberately, "that home is not a place, but people, and we have found ours in you, if you will have us." Maya tugged at Silas's hand. "Can we go home now? I want to see the horses." The simple question from the child broke through the last of Silas's hesitation. He knelt to her level, his voice gentle but serious. "Maya, would you like it if I became your father? If we were a family, truly?" The girl's face lit with joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. "You already are my father," she said as if explaining something obvious to a confused adult. "In here." She patted her chest over her heart. Silas looked up at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. "She speaks truth, as children do," Eleanor said softly. "But the choice must be yours as well. Our paths crossed by chance, our stories intertwined by circumstance. What happens next must be by choice." Standing, Silas took her hand in his. "I've been alone too long," he admitted, "afraid to build something that might be taken away again. But these past months with you and Maya, I've remembered what it means to live, not just survive." Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. "Then let us live, Silas Harrington. Together." The spring thaw transformed the landscape, revealing a world of possibility beneath the winter's frozen grip. 1 year after Eleanor and Maya had first arrived at his doorstep, Silas stood on the newly expanded porch of the cabin, watching the sunrise paint the eastern sky in shades of gold and pink. The changes to the property reflected the transformation in his life. A new room added to the cabin, a larger garden plot prepared for planting, a small corral built specifically for the pony Maya would soon begin riding. From inside came the sound of Eleanor's voice, singing softly in Apache as she prepared breakfast. The melody carried on the morning air, a reminder of the blending of worlds that had occurred beneath his roof. "Mr. Harrington!" a voice called from the trail, interrupting his reverie. Ezra approached on horseback, waving a newspaper. "Thought you'd want to see this," he called, dismounting at the gate. "Just arrived on yesterday's mail coach." Silas accepted the paper, eyebrows rising as he read the headline. "Territorial Governor establishes Apache Relations Commission, requests Native representatives." "Page 3 has the interesting part," Ezra prompted. Silas turned to the indicated page where a smaller article caught his eye. "Mrs. Eleanor of Whispering Pines, witness in Thornton corruption case, specifically requested to serve as commission member." "Eleanor," he called into the cabin, "you might want to see this." She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, Maya peering curiously around her skirts. Silas handed her the newspaper, watching as she read the article, her eyes widening in surprise. "They want me to serve on a commission?" she asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "A woman? An Apache?" "A survivor of injustice who chose healing over vengeance," Silas corrected. "Someone who understands both worlds and speaks with wisdom and clarity." "This would mean travel," Eleanor said thoughtfully. "Time away from home." "We would manage," Silas assured her, "Maya and I. And when you returned, we'd be waiting." Eleanor looked from the paper to Silas to Maya, weighing possibilities against responsibilities. "This could help prevent what happened to Running Bear from happening to others." "It could," Silas agreed. "Your voice deserves to be heard." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of approaching wagons drew their attention. A small procession was making its way toward the cabin, 3 wagons followed by a dozen people on horseback. As they drew closer, Silas recognized McGinty the blacksmith, Pastor Williams from the town church, and several other prominent citizens of Whispering Pines. "What's this?" he muttered, instinctively moving to stand protectively in front of Eleanor and Maya. McGinty raised his hand in greeting as they approached. "Morning, Harrington family. Hope we're not intruding too early." "Depends on the purpose of your visit," Silas replied cautiously. The blacksmith grinned. "Peaceful purpose, I assure you. We've come to help with your barn raising. Pastor's been collecting volunteers for weeks." Silas blinked in surprise. He had mentioned to Ezra his plans to build a larger barn come spring, but hadn't expected assistance, especially not from townspeople who had once viewed him with suspicion and Eleanor with outright hostility. "This is unexpected," he managed. Pastor Williams stepped forward. "After everything that happened with the Thorntons, many of us have been reflecting on our previous attitudes." The man looked uncomfortable but continued with evident sincerity. "We owe you and Mrs. Eleanor an apology and our gratitude. You exposed corruption that was poisoning our community. And some of us owe more than apologies," added Mrs. Peterson, the livery owner's wife, approaching Eleanor directly. "I judged you without knowing you. Many of us did. We'd like to make amends if you'll allow it." Eleanor stood very still, clearly processing this unexpected turn of events. Finally, she stepped forward, her posture dignified but welcoming. "In my tradition, when someone extends a hand in friendship, it would be poor manners to refuse it." The tension broke as people began unloading supplies from the wagons: lumber, tools, food for the communal meal that traditionally accompanied barn raisings. Children spilled from the wagons as well, including several who approached Maya with shy curiosity. "They brought a picnic," a small girl announced to Maya. "Mama made apple pies. Do you want to see?" Maya looked to her mother for permission. At Eleanor's nod, she cautiously followed the other children, casting frequent glances back as if to ensure her parents remained in sight. "I never expected this," Silas murmured to Eleanor, as they watched the activity unfold in their yard. "The circle of healing spreads farther than we can see," she replied. "One truth spoken creates space for others." By midday, the framework of the new barn was taking shape under McGinty's experienced direction. Women had set up tables laden with food, and children played in the spring sunshine, Maya gradually joining in their games with increasing confidence. During a break in the work, Pastor Williams approached Silas again, this time with a more somber expression. "There's something else we wanted to discuss with you both," he said, glancing at Eleanor. "The town council has voted to establish a memorial for Running Bear, acknowledging the injustice of his death. We'd like your guidance on how to do this respectfully." Eleanor's composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise showing in her eyes. "You would honor an Apache in our town?" "We would honor an innocent man who died because of our failure to question authority," the pastor replied, "and perhaps begin to heal the divide between our peoples in whatever small way we can." As the conversation continued, Silas found himself watching Eleanor, the thoughtful consideration she gave the pastor's request, the natural leadership she displayed in suggesting appropriate Apache traditions while respecting the town's limitations. He could see why the territorial governor had requested her for the commission. She moved between worlds with a grace few possessed, carrying her heritage with pride while engaging with the changing realities around her. Later, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, the community gathered for the evening meal. Silas found himself seated between Eleanor and Ezra, Maya playing nearby with her new friends, the partially completed barn standing as a testament to collaborative effort. "Quite a change from last year," Ezra observed quietly. "From shootouts to barn raisings. From suspicion to breaking bread," Silas agreed, "though I suspect not everyone in town has had such a change of heart." "No," Ezra acknowledged. "Some still hold to the old ways of thinking, but enough have opened their minds to make a difference." He glanced meaningfully at Eleanor, who was deep in conversation with Mrs. Peterson about medicinal plants. "She's changed them. And you?" "She changed me first," Silas admitted. "Taught me that living behind walls, either physical or emotional, isn't really living at all." As twilight descended, the visitors began to depart, promising to return the following day to complete the barn. Maya, exhausted from a day of unprecedented socialization, fell asleep almost immediately after they left, clutching both her wooden horse and a rag doll gifted by one of the town children. Eleanor and Silas sat on the porch in the gathering darkness, a companionable silence between them as they processed the day's events. Will you accept the governor's invitation? Silas finally asked. To serve on the commission? Eleanor gazed at the stars emerging in the deepening blue. I believe I must, she said after a moment, for Running Bear, for Maya's future, for all children who deserve a world with fewer boundaries between peoples. Silas took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. I'm proud of you, he said simply, though I'll miss you when you're gone. I will not be gone long, she promised. A week at most for each meeting, and I will carry you and Maya in my heart always. A comfortable silence settled between them again, broken only by the distant call of a whippoorwill. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice thoughtful. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not met that day? If you had not offered help to a desperate woman and child? Sometimes, Silas admitted. But then I remember something my father once told me. The most important moments in life often don't announce themselves. They slip in, disguised as ordinary decisions. A wise man, your father. He was. Silas looked at her in the dim light. He would have liked you, respected your strength, your dignity. And what of children? Eleanor asked suddenly. Have you thought of having more? Of Maya having siblings? The question caught him off guard, though he had indeed considered it during quiet moments. I have, he acknowledged, if you wanted that. I do, Eleanor said simply. Life continues, even after great loss. Silas leaned closer, pressing his forehead gently against hers in a gesture of intimacy that transcended their different traditions. Then we'll build that future too. By the second anniversary of their unlikely beginning, the changes were evident not just in their home, but in the broader community. The memorial for Running Bear had been established on the ridge where he had been hunting that fateful day, a simple stone marker with inscriptions in both English and Apache, acknowledging the injustice of his death and the corruption it had exposed. Eleanor had accepted the position on the governor's commission, traveling monthly to territorial headquarters for meetings where her unique perspective and articulate advocacy gradually earned the respect of officials who had initially viewed her appointment as mere political theater. She returned from each trip with stories of small victories and ongoing challenges, but also with a growing sense of purpose that extended beyond their family. Silas, meanwhile, had found his own role evolving. The barn raising had marked a turning point in his relationship with the town. No longer the solitary, scarred veteran viewed with wary respect, he had become something of a bridge figure himself, a white man who had stood for justice regardless of race, who had created a family that defied the expected boundaries. Young men from town occasionally sought his counsel on matters ranging from horse training to more serious life decisions. Some were veterans of smaller conflicts who recognized in him someone who had faced the darkness of war and found a path back to light. Others were simply drawn to his quiet strength and the evident happiness he had found despite early tragedy. Maya, now 7, attended the town school 3 days a week, the first Apache child to do so. The transition had not been without challenges, but her natural intelligence and the friendship of the children who had participated in the barn raising had smoothed the way. At home, Eleanor ensured she also learned Apache traditions, language, and stories, creating a child who moved between cultures with the ease of one who had never known they were supposed to be separate. On a warm autumn evening, as golden light bathed the expanded homestead, Eleanor sat on the porch steps watching Maya demonstrate her riding skills on the pony Silas had trained for her. Her hand rested lightly on her growing belly, where their second child, a son, according to the tribal wisdom her mother had taught her, would arrive with the winter snows. Silas emerged from the barn, pausing to admire the scene before joining her on the steps. She's becoming quite the horsewoman, he observed, pride evident in his voice. She has a good teacher, Eleanor replied, leaning slightly against his shoulder. They watched in comfortable silence as Maya guided her pony through the patterns Silas had taught her, her small face serious with concentration. I received a letter today, Eleanor said after a while, from the governor's office. Oh? Silas glanced at her, curious. They are considering expanding the commission's authority to include review of land disputes throughout the territory. She turned to face him fully. They've asked me to lead the effort. Silas's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's significant. It would mean more travel, Eleanor acknowledged, more responsibility, but also more opportunity to create real change. You should accept, Silas said without hesitation. You've earned their trust, their respect. And what of our family? Our new child coming? Silas smiled, placing his hand over hers on her belly. Families adapt. We'll find our way, as we always have. He paused, considering. Perhaps when the baby is a bit older, Maya and I could sometimes travel with you. She should see more of the territory, understand the work her mother does. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly. You would do that? Why not? The farm can manage without us for short periods. His expression grew more serious. What you're doing matters, Eleanor. Not just to us, but to many others. The future you're helping to shape is one our children will inherit. She studied him with a depth of emotion that still humbled him after all this time. When I first met you, I thought you were simply a kind man offering temporary shelter. I never imagined you would become the center of a new life. When I first met you, Silas countered, I thought I was simply fulfilling a basic human obligation. I never imagined you would help me find redemption. Not redemption, Eleanor corrected gently. Healing, for both of us. From the corral, Maya called out, seeking their attention for a new riding maneuver. Both turned to watch, their shared pride a tangible thing between them. The setting sun cast long shadows across land that had witnessed their journey from strangers to family, from broken souls to healing hearts. As twilight softened the landscape, Silas reflected on the boundaries they had crossed, between settler and native, between past and future, between isolation and connection. The scars remained, both visible and hidden, but they had become markers of survival rather than limitations. In the distance, the first star appeared in the deepening blue sky. According to Eleanor's tradition, it was the ancestor star, watching over those who remained. Silas wondered if Running Bear looked down from that star, if Rose and Thomas shared its light. If they could see how the circle of violence had been broken, replaced by a different circle, one of family, understanding, and hope. Maya finished her riding demonstration and dismounted with growing confidence, leading her pony toward them with evident pride. Eleanor rose to greet her daughter, the silver swallow brooch catching the last light of day at her throat, the bird that always returned home, now a symbol of their shared journey. Silas followed more slowly, savoring the moment, committing it to memory. These were the images he would draw in his journal now, not the horrors of war or the grief of loss, but the quiet triumphs of everyday courage. Maya's growing independence, Eleanor's expanding influence, their child yet to be born. A family forged not in blood, but in choice, in compassion that had transcended the boundaries others thought immutable. As the first stars emerged in the darkening sky, the Harrington family moved together toward the warm light of their home, leaving behind the shadows of the past and walking confidently into a future they continued to build, choice by choice, day by day, together.